I see people make the same mistake every spring, and it costs them far more than they realize. They look at beautiful gardens in magazines or online and convince themselves that creating a place like that takes thousands of dollars, so they stop before they even begin. That is exactly how an ordinary yard stays ordinary for years, while the truth is that some of the most expensive looking gardens I have ever visited were built one simple project at a time with old materials and a little patience. I learned this lesson many years ago when an older neighbor invited me through his garden gate. Nothing there was expensive, and yet every corner looked peaceful and carefully designed. I asked him where he bought all those decorations, and he just smiled and said that almost everything came from things other people wanted to throw away. That conversation completely changed the way I looked at my own yard. Since then, I have stopped chasing expensive garden centers and started paying attention to simple ideas that make people slow down and look twice. If you stay with me today, I will show you 10 budget-friendly garden decoration projects that can completely change how your garden feels without emptying your wallet. These are not difficult projects, and you do not need special skills or expensive tools. Most of them can be finished over a weekend, and many use materials you probably already have tucked away in a garage or shed. What surprises people the most is that the goal is not to fill the garden with decorations. That is where many homeowners make another mistake. They keep adding ornaments until the whole place feels crowded and confusing. A well-designed garden usually has fewer decorations, but every single one has a purpose and naturally draws your eye through the space. That is one of those old ideas I was shown many years ago, and I still use it every season. Before we begin with the first project, I want you to imagine walking into your own garden a few weeks from now and hearing visitors ask who designed it, because that simple question is worth far more than the money you save. And the very first project may surprise you because almost nobody realizes how much difference one forgotten item can make. One thing I discovered after that conversation with my neighbor is that the entrance to a garden tells the whole story before anyone even takes a second step. Most people spend money decorating flower beds while they completely ignore the path that leads through the garden. That is a mistake because the path quietly tells your eyes where to look. Years ago, an old gardener showed me how he transformed a plain walkway without buying expensive stone or fancy paving. He collected bricks that local builders were throwing away and mixed them with flat stones he found along country roads with permission. He never tried to make everything perfectly straight because nature is never perfectly straight. He simply left small spaces where creeping thyme and moss could slowly grow between the stones. After one season, the whole path looked like it had been there for decades, and visitors always assumed it was professionally designed. I copied that same idea in my own garden, and the difference was much bigger than I expected. Suddenly, every flower bed looked more valuable, even though I had not changed the plants at all. That taught me something I have never forgotten. Sometimes the background matters more than the decoration itself. Another small detail that many people overlook is the edge of the flower beds. Sharp, clean borders immediately make a garden look organized, even if the plants are simple. I use old bricks laid flat or short pieces of natural wood that I already have. Sometimes I even recycle small tree branches cut during pruning. They cost almost nothing, but they create a clear line that makes the whole space feel intentional instead of random. Most people skip this because they think visitors only notice flowers, but that is not true. Your eyes notice order long before they notice color. There is another little trick that I learned many years ago and almost nobody uses anymore. Instead of placing decorations everywhere, I create one small stopping point where people naturally pause. It might be an old wooden bench, a large clay pot, or a simple lantern surrounded by flowers. That single focal point gives the garden personality without making it feel crowded. The amazing part is that none of these ideas require a large budget. They simply require looking at ordinary materials differently. And the next project is probably the cheapest one of all. Yet it changes the atmosphere of a garden every single evening, in a way that expensive landscaping often fails to do. As the years went by, I realized that the gardens people remember are usually not the ones filled with expensive decorations. They are the ones that feel warm and welcoming even after the sun begins to disappear. That is where the third project comes in. And I honestly think it gives you one of the biggest changes for the smallest amount of money. I stopped buying costly outdoor lights a long time ago because they rarely lasted as long as I expected. Instead, I started collecting old glass jars from the kitchen. Most people throw them away without thinking twice, but they can become beautiful garden lanterns in less than an hour. I clean the jars well and place a small solar light inside or sometimes a simple battery candle. Then I wrap a little wire around the neck of each jar so I can hang them from tree branches, fence posts, or simple wooden hooks. During the day, they almost disappear into the garden, but when evening comes, they create a soft, gentle light that makes every path and flower bed feel calm and inviting. Visitors often ask where I bought them, and they are always surprised when I tell them they were made from ordinary jars that cost nothing. One thing an older gardener showed me many years ago was not to place all the lights in one area. That is another mistake many people make. They create one bright corner while the rest of the garden disappears into darkness. Instead, I spread the lights little by little so your eyes naturally move through the space. It creates depth and makes even a small yard feel much larger than it really is. Another simple trick is placing one lantern near a favorite plant or beside a decorative pot instead of trying to light everything equally. A single soft light creates far more interest than several bright ones. If you have an old watering can or a rusty metal bucket that no longer holds water, do not throw it away. Set one of these lanterns beside it with a few trailing flowers around the base, and suddenly that forgotten object becomes part of the design. I have learned that gardens become memorable because of small, thoughtful details instead of expensive purchases. Very few people still use this old approach because it takes a little imagination, but the result is something money alone cannot buy. And the next project starts with one of the simplest materials you will ever find, yet it has the power to make an ordinary corner look like it belongs in a professionally designed country garden. One of the easiest ways I have found to make a garden look expensive is to give old wood a second life instead of sending it to the firewood pile. I still smile when I remember the first wooden planter I built because it came from a few weathered fence boards that everyone else thought were useless. They were rough and faded, but after I cleaned them and put them together, they had a natural character that brand new lumber simply could not match. Since then, I have built several planters from reclaimed wood, and every one of them has added more charm to the garden than anything I could have bought in a store. The secret is to keep the design simple. Most people think they need perfect cuts and fancy tools, but they really do not. A basic rectangular box with clean lines looks timeless and lets the flowers become the center of attention. I usually plant colorful annuals in one box and herbs in another because mixing beauty with something useful has always made sense to me. An old gardener once told me that every decoration should either grow something or tell a story, and I have never forgotten those words. Another small detail that makes a huge difference is raising the planter slightly off the ground with a couple of hidden blocks. That little bit of height creates shadows underneath and makes the whole piece look lighter and more carefully placed. Most people never notice why it looks better, but they immediately feel that it does. If the wood already has cracks, knots, or faded color, I leave most of it alone because that weathered appearance gives the garden a relaxed country feeling that many people try to recreate with expensive furniture. Sometimes I place two matching planters beside the entrance to the garden, or on each side of a simple bench. That creates balance without making the space feel stiff or formal. Another forgotten trick is to plant one trailing flower along the edge so it gently spills over the sides as summer goes on. It softens the wood and makes the planter seem as though it has always belonged there. None of this costs very much, and yet visitors often assume these planters came from an expensive garden shop. The truth is, they are usually built from materials that somebody else was ready to throw away. That is something I have always enjoyed because saving money while creating something beautiful is deeply satisfying. And the next project begins with an ordinary object that many people already have hidden in the garage, even though very few ever imagined it could become one of the most eye-catching features anywhere in the garden. There is one project that always starts a conversation whenever someone visits my garden. And the funny thing is that it usually begins with something most people leave forgotten in the corner of a garage. I am talking about old wooden ladders, wagon wheels, or even worn garden carts that no longer serve their original purpose. Years ago, I almost threw away an old wooden ladder because it was too worn out to use safely. Before I did, an older friend stopped me and suggested leaning it against a fence and placing flower pots on each step. I honestly was not convinced, but I tried it anyway because it cost me nothing. Within a few weeks, the flowers had started to spill over the edges, and the whole display looked like something from a country garden magazine. Visitors thought I had bought a special plant stand, and could hardly believe it was the same old ladder that had been collecting dust for years. Since then, I have learned that old objects bring something new. Decorations often cannot. They carry a little history, and that makes the garden feel personal instead of looking like every other yard on the street. If you do not have an old ladder, then an unused wheelbarrow works just as well. Fill it with colorful flowers, herbs, or even ornamental grasses, and park it near the entrance or beside a path. The wheels and handles naturally draw the eye and create a strong focal point without looking forced. One mistake many people make is trying to repaint everything with bright, glossy colors. I almost always leave the wood slightly weathered because soft, faded colors blend into the garden much better than shiny new paint. If the wood needs protection, I use a clear outdoor sealer instead of covering all its character. Another little secret that was shown to me many years ago is to vary the height of the flower pots. Do not line everything up at the same level because nature never grows that way. Place one pot higher, another slightly lower, and let trailing plants connect the spaces between them. That simple change creates movement and makes the whole display feel alive. You can even tuck a small lantern or an old watering can beside the arrangement to complete the scene without spending much at all. Every time I finish one of these simple projects, I remind myself that good garden design has very little to do with money, and almost everything to do with using ordinary things in thoughtful ways. And the next idea may be the easiest project of them all because it transforms empty corners that most people completely overlook into places that quietly become everyone's favorite part of the garden. One corner of the garden taught me something I wish I had understood much earlier. For years, I kept trying to fill every empty space with more flowers because I thought a full garden always looked better. The truth was exactly the opposite. The garden looked busy, but it did not feel peaceful. Then, one afternoon, I visited a small country home where an elderly couple had created the simplest little sitting area I had ever seen. There was nothing expensive about it, just two old wooden chairs, a small homemade table, and a few flower pots placed around them. That corner completely changed the feeling of the entire garden because it invited people to stop instead of simply walking through. I went home and built my own version using furniture that had been sitting unused in my shed. After a little cleaning and a fresh coat of outdoor paint, the chairs looked almost new. I added a simple gravel circle underneath using inexpensive crushed stone which keeps weeds away and gives the whole area a neat finished appearance. Around the edge, I placed a few large pots filled with flowers that bloom at different times during the season. So there is always a little color no matter when I step outside. One thing an older gardener showed me many years ago was to avoid placing everything in perfect straight lines. Nature is soft and relaxed, so I move the pots slightly forward or backward until the space feels comfortable. Most people never measure anything, and neither do I. I simply stand back, look at it from different angles, and make small adjustments until it feels right. Another forgotten trick is adding one natural element that changes with the seasons. Sometimes it is a large decorative stone. Other times it is a simple wooden barrel planted with flowers or even a small bird bath. These pieces quietly become part of the garden instead of demanding attention. I have noticed that birds often visit more frequently once there is fresh water nearby, and hearing them while sitting with a morning cup of coffee makes the garden feel even more alive. Very few people realize that creating places to enjoy the garden is just as important as planting it. Flowers may catch your eye, but comfortable spaces keep you there. The best part is that none of these changes require a large budget or professional landscaping. They simply require slowing down and thinking about how you want the garden to feel. And there is one final project that brings all of these simple ideas together and leaves your entire yard looking more complete than most people ever expect from such inexpensive materials. When I look around my garden today, I do not see expensive decorations or fancy landscaping. I see years of small ideas coming together one project at a time, and that is probably the biggest lesson I can share with you. A beautiful garden is never built in a single weekend, and it is certainly not built with the biggest budget. It grows the same way flowers grow, slowly, steadily, and with a little care every season. Every old board that became a planter, every recycled jar that turned into a lantern, every forgotten ladder covered with flowers, and every quiet sitting corner has added another layer of warmth to this place. None of these projects required special talent, and that should encourage anyone who thinks they are not creative enough. I certainly did not begin as a skilled builder or designer. I simply learned to stop asking what something used to be and started asking what it could become. That one habit has probably saved me hundreds, if not thousands of dollars over the years, while giving my garden a look that feels personal instead of copied from a catalog. If I could offer one piece of advice, it would be this: do not rush to finish everything at once. Pick one project that speaks to you and enjoy building it. Live with it for a while and notice how it changes the feeling of your garden. Then move on to the next idea when the time feels right. That slow approach keeps gardening enjoyable instead of becoming another expensive chore. Before long, you will begin seeing possibilities everywhere. An old bucket becomes a flower display. A weathered board becomes a planter. A simple stone becomes part of a peaceful corner. Your garden slowly starts telling your own story instead of looking like everyone else's. That is something money can never buy. I hope these 10 simple projects inspire you to look at your yard in a completely different way, because sometimes the most valuable improvements are hiding in places we stopped noticing years ago. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope the next time you step into your garden, you will see not what it is today, but what it can quietly become with just one simple project at a time. And in the next video, I want to show you another collection of forgotten garden ideas that can completely transform an ordinary backyard without spending a fortune.